Washington State's Olympic Peninsula has some of the country's most diverse wildlife all in a concentrated area. Here you will find rainforests, beaches, mountains, waterfalls, and so much more than I could even show in this video. We're Jack and Jordan, and we try to bring you our honest travel advice so you can make the most of your time and money. You can find a download in the description that will give you our exact itinerary and recommendations of other things to do if you want to swap out some stuff that we did if you didn't like it as much. When planning a trip to Olympic, it is important to note that the park is huge. There are the beaches, Hurricane Ridge, Lake Crescent, the Hoh Rainforest, and then just Southern Olympic. There are two sides to Olympic that are about 2 hours from each other, and you have to plan your trip accordingly. The way we did it was we did 2 days on the Port Angeles side, 1 day in between going to Forks, and then 1 entire day in Forks. This was an effective way for us because we spent one of those days on the Port Angeles side going to Victoria, Canada, which I do recommend doing if you have the time, but if you want to make this a 3-day trip instead of a 4-day trip, you could cut this out and still probably see everything you need. You could do this in 2 days, but it would be very rushed and you'd have to cut out some of the things I talk about in this video. Port Angeles will include Hurricane Ridge and Lake Crescent. Forks will include Hoh Rainforest and the beaches, and Duc Falls could go either way. Unlike Mount Rainier, the logistics of visiting Olympic are a lot easier. There's no permits or reservations that you have to worry about unless you're going on a backpacking trip, and the weather is a lot less harsh as long as you don't mind some rain. Olympic will be best May through September if you want to experience everything. Hurricane Ridge will still have snow into early June, but the road itself should be open. Getting there is similar to Mount Rainier. It's about 2.5 hours away from Seattle, so not too bad of a drive. Once you're in the park, be prepared to drive. A lot. From Sequim to Hurricane Ridge is an hour. From Hurricane Ridge to Lake Crescent is another hour. From Lake Crescent to Forks is 45 minutes. As you can see, you'll be spending a lot of time in the car, so hopefully this video helps you plan out your stops to make them a little more efficient and allow you to see everything you want to do. The first area I'd like to break down is Hurricane Ridge. This is the only region of the park where I do believe it's necessary to go in July or August, just because you don't want to be limited by trail closures and you want to be able to experience the whole thing. To explore Hurricane Ridge, I would either stay in Sequim or Port Angeles. Sequim is about 20 minutes away from Port Angeles, give or take, so it's a little further out, but there are a lot of nice Airbnbs like the one that we stayed in, which you can find here in the description. Staying in Port Angeles will give you easy access to the city, but both have good enough grocery stores and plenty of amenities, so you're not really limited by staying at either one. From the park entrance, located just outside of Port Angeles, you have a 30 to 40 minute drive up to the Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center. The Hurricane Ridge Visitor Center doesn't exist anymore, it burned down, but the location is still there and it's the best place to get breathtaking views with absolutely zero effort. Seriously, the hikes don't give much better views than the Visitor Center gives, so take your time here and get some good pictures. For hiking, you can do the Hurricane Hill Trail. This is easily the most popular trail on the Hurricane Ridge section. It's about 3 miles out and back. You can also hike the Kalaloch Ridge Trail from the Visitor Center, which is what we did. It's about 7.5 miles and it is pretty strenuous, so do be prepared if you decide to do it. If you don't want to go all the way to Kalaloch Ridge, you can just hike to Sunrise Point to get an amazing view of Canada on one side and the Olympics on the other. The coolest part of this park is being able to be at 7,000 feet of elevation and yet be looking down at the ocean and into another country from across the sea. If you're up for the challenge, you can make the Kalaloch Ridge Trail shorter but more difficult by doing the Switchback Trail. It's about 3 miles out and back, but it is super steep. You actually do a section of the Switchback Trail on the 7.5 mile version, and that was easily the hardest part of the hike. I can't imagine doing it for all 3 miles. The Switchback Trail doesn't give you the diversity of terrain that the Sunrise Trail does, so I would recommend doing the one from the Visitor Center. I would consider Hurricane Ridge to be a must-do when visiting Olympic. Don't skip it. The views from the Visitor Center are insane and are some of the best mountain views I've ever gotten anywhere in the country. Make sure you visit Hurricane Ridge. It's worth the time. Plan your trip for the summer just to make sure you're able to see it. Another must-do when visiting Olympic National Park is going to Lake Crescent. The water is crystal clear. It kind of looks like the cool blue Gatorade color. I've never really seen any water like this, even in the ocean. For Lake Crescent, you can stay in Port Angeles or Sequim. Port Angeles is probably a little better just because of the proximity. Just by staying in Sequim, which was 15 to 20 minutes further from the lake, we saved a couple $100. So that's one of the financial tips I would do when planning your trips, is just look at places that are a little further outside, sacrifice a little bit of convenience if money is an option. If money is not an option, you could opt to stay at the Lake Crescent Lodge. This is where we had lunch on our first day in Olympic. This place will run you over $300 a night and should be booked super far in advance. Of all the national park lodges we've seen, this one might be the most worth it just because of the views from every single room. The food at the restaurant is so good, and it's not just for lodge food, it's genuinely really good. It's nice to dine while looking out at the lake in this old, very classy lodge. We decided to do the Devil's Punch Bowl hike, and it's about a 15-minute drive from the lodge. The Punch Bowl is one of the most popular spots in the park due to the bridge and cliff jumping capabilities. One complaint about the Punch Bowl is that it was packed. Even on a Wednesday, it was super crowded, so if it was up to us to do it again, I would just swim at the Lake Crescent Lodge. The lodge has a larger beach area, a dock, a spot to rent kayaks. It would have been a much more chill experience instead of doing the hike to the Punch Bowl. Don't skip going to Lake Crescent, just skip on doing the Punch Bowl hike, enjoy time at the lodge. A hike you can do near this area is Mount Storm King. Mount Storm King is one of the most popular but also one of the most strenuous trails in the park. It's about 4 miles out and back with a 2,100 foot elevation gain during that time. There's a section at the end where you have to pull yourself up by ropes to get to the top. It's not for the weak, but it is cool and gives you an amazing view. Moving along on our list, still in what I consider to be the Lake Crescent area, is the Duc Falls hike. This is about halfway in between Port Angeles and Forks, so it makes for a great stop on the way, which is what we did. The trail is fairly short, only around 2 miles, and it's very easy. We saw families of all ages doing it, so I think anyone can do this trail. The falls are way more impressive than I expected, so if you have the time, I would recommend hitting this area, but Solduck's not necessarily on our must-do list like Hurricane Ridge and Lake Crescent are. The only reason for this is that it is kind of out of the way. I mentioned that it's about halfway between Port Angeles and Forks, but it's another, once again, 30 to 40 minutes off of the main road. So if you have time built into your day, then go and hike the falls, but if not, I would recommend just going straight from Lake Crescent to Forks. But there is a resort and hot springs there, so if you wanted to spend the night or camp there, then I would recommend doing Solduck if you could build that into your trip. Next up are the beaches of Olympic National Park. This section of the park is huge, so I'm gonna break it down into a few more subcategories. Those categories are Shishi Beach, La Push, Rialto Beach, Ruby Beach, and Kalaloch. We visited all of the beaches that I listed except for Shishi Beach, so I'll break down the 4 of them now so you can plan which one you wanna see. Rialto Beach is my favorite beach in the park. It's easy to get to from Forks, it has great tide pools, and has the 3-mile out and back hike to Hole in the Wall. Ruby Beach is a great spot to hit if you're driving by or if it's low tide. It's pretty neat, but I still would recommend going to Rialto over it. La Push has 3 separate beaches. There's first, second, and third beach. Second beach has a 2-mile hike, third beach has a 1.5-mile hike, and first beach is kind of right off the road. Second beach is probably the most impressive, but also is the longest hike, and it's right next to Rialto Beach, so I'd probably recommend doing Rialto instead if you're short on time. Kalaloch has the famous Tree of Life on the beach, but there aren't as many sea stacks here, so if you don't care about the tree, I might skip over it. It also has a general store and a lodge, so if you're looking for a place to stay on this side of the park that's not in Forks, you could opt to stay at the Kalaloch Lodge. An essential part of planning your trip to the beaches of Olympic National Park is looking at tide charts. Going during a high tide could ruin the tide pools for you as they'll all be underwater and you won't get to see the wildlife. It's super easy to do. You can find them online. We'll link our tide chart that we used in the description. For us, it was around 5:30 p.m., but it does change on the cycles of the moon, so just look a couple days before you go on your trip. If you have never been to the Pacific Coast before, then I think these beaches are a must-do. If you've been to beaches in Northern California or Oregon, then these beaches won't be anything new to you, but they are still beautiful. It's fun to explore the beaches and to physically relax. If you're used to hiking in the Hurricane Ridge or Lake Crescent areas, this could be a much better change of pace for your trip. The Hoh Rainforest is the last section of Olympic National Park that we saw on our trip. Getting to the rainforest early is very important. It's one of the few sections that will cap cars as they come in. We got there around 8:15 on a Saturday and the parking lot was full, but there was some street parking. When we left around 10:30, the line was probably an hour long, so getting there early is no joke. This area is famous nationwide for being one of the only rainforests in North America and its otherworldly terrain, which you can access quite easily. You can hike the 1-mile Hall of Mosses Trail and the 1-mile Spruce Nature Trail, and they're super easy and meant for anybody to do. If I'm being completely honest with you, the Hoh Rainforest was one of the most overrated parts of Olympic National Park to us, and that might be a little controversial. If you're operating with, say, 2 days to see the park, there are so many other areas that I would recommend doing, and honestly, I think the trees on the Duc Falls hike are very similar to what you get in the Hoh Rainforest without as much of a drive and without as much effort of getting there super early to make sure you get a parking spot. Not that the rainforest isn't beautiful, and if you have 3 days, I would recommend seeing it, but if you're crunched for time, I don't think it's essential to a trip here. The southern region of the park includes the Quinault Rainforest and Lake Quinault. We did not get to explore this area, so we don't have any footage to show you, and I don't feel qualified to talk about it if I wasn't able to see it myself, but they are really nice areas and would be something worth looking into when planning a trip. To recap, when visiting Olympic National Park, it's important to plan accordingly just because of how big the park is to see all the spots you want to see. If you're like us and that's everything I listed here, then that's awesome, and you can follow our exact itinerary that you can download in the description. But if you want to modify it, I also provide 2-day and 1-day itineraries in there for you to look at. The park is incredibly diverse, and every area has something unique to offer, and I do believe they're all worth seeing if you have the time. Hopefully this video helped you plan your trip to Olympic and kind of broke down the areas for you in a way that makes sense. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and be on the lookout for more travel content like this coming soon. We aim to bring you honest advice that will help you save your time and money when planning your trips. Be sure to follow our social media down below to keep up with us, and always remember to travel smarter, not harder.